A former cop, a brutal crime, and a dog that refused to forget. What seemed like the end turned into something no one expected. Stay with us. This story will challenge everything you believe about justice and loyalty. Watch till the end. It's worth every second. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The courtroom in downtown Chicago was silent as the judge's gavel struck wood, echoing through the large chamber like a final nail in a coffin. John Harper, a former police officer with over 2 decades of service, stood in the defendant's box, his expression unreadable. He had been accused of a horrifying crime, the rape and murder of his 18-year-old girlfriend, Amber Watson. Her charred remains had been found deep within the Black Hollow Forest just outside the city, and the evidence presented against him seemed overwhelming. Screens displayed messages retrieved from John's phone, heated arguments with Amber, angry threats, and a final, chilling text. "It'd be a shame if you disappeared on me." Alongside this, a handgun traced back to John was found near the crime scene. His hunting license placed him in the forest on the day Amber went missing, and all forensic trails pointed to his presence. The prosecutor painted him as a cold, reclusive man, someone prone to violent outbursts who had grown obsessed with the much younger woman. Even though he maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings, the jury's deliberation was brief. The sentence was swift: death. Judge William Carter leaned forward, peering over his glasses with the stern calm of someone who had long since stopped questioning verdicts. "John Harper," he said, voice echoing with finality, "you are hereby sentenced to death by lethal injection. May God have mercy on your soul." Murmurs erupted throughout the gallery. Some gasped, others whispered accusations. The Watson family clung together in grief, Amber's father, Thomas Watson, barely able to remain upright. The courtroom lights buzzed above, as if mocking the stillness that followed. When asked if he had a final request, John did not hesitate. "I'd like to see my dog, Max, one last time." The room rippled with confusion. Some scoffed at what they saw as a trivial wish from a convicted monster. A man about to die and all he wanted was a dog? Even the guards rolled their eyes as they noted it down. But John didn't flinch. His voice was steady, his eyes distant. He knew no one believed him. Not anymore. That night, John sat alone in a high-security cell. The cold concrete around him was silent except for the ticking of an overhead light. Time crawled. The days since his arrest had blurred into one long chain of interrogation, courtroom drama, and judgment. No one had truly listened to him. No one had doubted the convenient narrative. He had buried his emotions, his grief, and his confusion under layers of survival instinct. But now, with the end approaching, he allowed himself one honest moment. Max, his dog, his only true companion after years of disillusionment and isolation. A black Labrador retriever with eyes that seemed to understand more than most humans ever could. He'd raised Max from a pup, trained him, shared every quiet evening on the porch of his remote cabin. When Amber had come into his life, it was Max who had first accepted her presence, wagging his tail at her touch. And now she was gone. And the world believed John had done it. But Max knew. Max had been there. Somehow, John believed the dog had sensed something that terrible night. When the guard opened the door and allowed the dog inside, John's breath caught in his throat. Max padded in silently, head low, ears perked, his body tensed with confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. The moment he saw John, he bolted forward, tail wagging, whining with excitement. John dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the animal, burying his face in Max's thick fur. "You know I didn't do it," he whispered, You were there. You remember." Max licked his face, nuzzled into him, and let out a low, soft growl, not of aggression, but of awareness. Then something strange happened. The dog pulled back. His body stiffened. He looked John in the eye with a strange urgency, then turned toward the cell door. "What is it, boy?" John asked softly. Max glanced back once, barked, and ran straight through the open door. The guards shouted in alarm, scrambling to react, but Max was gone before they could stop him, a blur of black fur disappearing into the hallway. By the time the prison had organized a response, Max was already outside. He raced through alleys and down dark streets driven by instinct. The night was cold, the air sharp, and snow began to fall as he ran. He crossed roads, ducked through fences, and finally disappeared into the shadows of Black Hollow Forest. No one knew where he was going, but John did. Somehow he felt it in his bones. Max was going back to where it all happened. And somewhere in the darkness, beneath the layers of grief and injustice, a sliver of hope took root in John's heart. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe Max would find what everyone else had missed. Maybe, just maybe, the truth still had a chance. Max sprinted through the dim streets of downtown Chicago, his breath turning into small clouds in the cold night air. The snow fell steadily, blanketing the sidewalks and rooftops, but the dog never slowed. His paws beat against the frozen concrete, leaving prints that would vanish within minutes. Lights from storefronts flickered as he passed, but Max didn't stop. He didn't need to think. Instinct and memory drove him. Something in him, deeper than training, told him exactly where to go. He remembered the scent of amber. He remembered that night. He remembered the fear. He reached the edge of the city just before midnight. The forest stood tall and dark in the distance, the trees like sentinels guarding old secrets. Black Hollow Forest was a place John had always called home, and Max had roamed its trails countless times. But tonight, the forest felt different. The snow muted every sound except the crunch beneath his feet. No crickets, no wind. Only silence and cold. He entered the tree line without hesitation, weaving between trunks and roots, his nose close to the ground. He was looking for something. He didn't know what, but he knew it mattered. He sniffed along a trail John had used before, past the frozen stream, and reached a clearing where the trees thinned out into a wide patch of snow-covered earth. That's when his head jerked up. A scent. Familiar. Faint, but there. He followed it, ears perked, body low. The scent led him to a half-buried shape under the snow, a discarded bottle broken open. Max sniffed it, growled softly, then kept searching. Just beyond the tree line, another scent caught his attention. Stronger this time. He started digging with frantic determination. Within minutes, he unearthed a small bundle wrapped in plastic and caked with frozen mud. Inside was a used condom and a folded black glove. Max paused, nose twitching. The smells were wrong. They weren't John's. He growled again, low and deep, then sniffed the surrounding ground. A few feet away, partially hidden beneath a rotting log, was a micro SD card. He recognized it by smell. It had once been attached to Amber's camera. Max picked it up gently in his mouth, careful not to damage it. The snow thickened, wind rising, but Max turned back toward the city without hesitation. He had what he came for. He ran for hours, retracing his steps with uncanny precision, navigating alleyways and busy intersections before arriving just before dawn at the courthouse steps. There, under the pre-dawn sky, he stood waiting. People noticed him. pointing at the lone black dog sitting still as a statue in the snow. The courthouse guard, arriving early, stepped out of his car and frowned at the sight. The dog didn't move. He just stared at the building, his breath slow and steady, his jaws still clenched tightly around the plastic-wrapped memory card. Inside the building, Judge William Carter arrived not long after. He stepped from his car, coffee in hand, rubbing his tired eyes. When he saw the dog, he nearly spilled his drink. "Is that the same damn dog from the prison?" he muttered. Max barked once, loud and commanding. Not a call for attention, a demand. Carter hesitated, then called one of the security officers. "Bring me that dog," he said. As the guards approached, Max didn't resist. He stood, walked forward, and dropped the small bundle at Carter's feet. The judge looked down, confusion slowly turning to concern. "Get this checked," he ordered, pointing at the card, "now." One of the officers took it carefully, placing it in an evidence bag. Carter couldn't explain why he felt nervous, but something about the dog's stare made him uneasy. "And someone call BPD," he added. "I want Detective Michael Bennett in here, immediately." Meanwhile, in his cell, John Harper hadn't slept. He sat on his cot, staring at the wall, his heart racing. Something in his chest tightened, the kind of feeling he used to get before walking into a shootout. He didn't know where Max was. No one did, but he believed. That dog had always been different, smarter, more aware. If there was any being on earth that could find the truth, it was Max. At sunrise, the courthouse buzzed with quiet urgency. Detective Bennett arrived within the hour, still fastening his holster. Carter handed him the card and the report from the early analysis. "This was delivered by a dog," the judge said flatly. Bennett raised an eyebrow. "A dog?" "John Harper's dog," Carter clarified. "And if this is what I think it is, we might have made a serious mistake." Bennett inserted the micro SD card into a reader, connecting it to his laptop in the evidence room. The screen blinked to life. What they saw made them both freeze. It was a video, grainy, low light, but clear enough. Amber, terrified, tied up, two other girls beside her. Laughter in the background. Men's voices. Faces partially visible. One of them stepped closer to the camera. The name stitched on his vest read Trey. Another, taller man with a snake tattoo along his arm, leaned over one of the girls. His face fully visible. Jackson Miller. Carter sat down slowly, his hands trembling. "Jesus Christ!" The video continued. Screams, firelight, shadows dancing. Bennett shut the laptop abruptly, face pale. "We need to reopen this case," he said. "Right now." Outside the building, Max waited in silence. He didn't know what the humans were saying inside, but he could feel it, the shift, the weight lifting, and though his tail didn't wag, his body finally relaxed. He had done what he came to do. Now it was their turn. Judge William Carter sat in his chambers, the blinds half closed to keep out the early morning sun that now felt too harsh, too invasive. His fingers drummed against the edge of his desk as the events of the morning played over and over in his head. A dog delivering critical evidence. It sounded like the plot of a low-budget drama. And yet, here he was, watching his legal team rush to verify everything the micro SD card had revealed. Beside him stood Detective Michael Bennett, his expression grim as he read through the forensic results that had arrived only moments before. DNA found on the discarded condoms retrieved from the forest did not match John Harper's profile. In fact, it didn't match anything currently on file, which in itself was strange but not unexpected. More importantly, the video footage was real. Clear, time-stamped, and horrifying in its content. 3 young women, including Amber Watson, were held against their will and assaulted by at least 2 men. The camera caught enough glimpses of their attackers to identify them: Jackson Miller and Trey Stevens. The same men previously suspected in other violent incidents, though never charged due to lack of evidence. Judge Carter pushed himself to his feet and walked to the window, staring out at the busy street below. "We've sentenced an innocent man," he said quietly. "We nearly killed him." Bennett didn't answer. He was still reading, still looking for anything else they might have missed. When the lab results came in confirming the presence of DNA from at least 3 other individuals in the evidence Max had brought back, Bennett cursed under his breath. "Get me the DA," he said to the clerk at the door. "Now." Judge Carter turned. "No, we're going to the prison. I want to speak to Harper directly." "You believe him now?" "I don't have the luxury of belief," Carter said, grabbing his coat. "I have proof." At the prison, John sat in silence on the edge of his cot, staring at the same crack in the wall he'd been watching for hours. He barely noticed the noise in the corridor until the door opened and a guard stepped aside. Judge Carter entered, followed by Bennett and 2 correctional officers. "Mr. Harper," Carter said, his tone formal but not as cold as before. John stood slowly, unsure of what to expect. "Your dog," Carter continued, "may have just saved your life." John's eyes widened slightly. "Max, what do you mean?" Bennett stepped forward and laid the printed reports on the metal table. "Your dog led us to a spot in Black Hollow. We found evidence, a memory card, items with DNA that don't match you, and a video." John didn't move. His body remained still, but his breathing shifted. "You found something." "We did, and we're reopening your case effective immediately." Carter looked him in the eyes for the first time since the trial. "You may not be guilty, Mr. Harper." John let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "May not?" "Don't take this as freedom yet," Bennett said, "but we've got a team pulling files on Miller and Stevens. If what we found holds up, you'll be out of here soon." The word soon felt like a lifeline. John sat down slowly, placing his head in his hands. Max had done it. That dog had done what no lawyer, no friend, no colleague had managed to do. He had chased the truth through snow and silence, and now everything was beginning to shift. Back at the courthouse, Judge Carter called an emergency meeting of the judicial panel. Prosecutors, forensic analysts, and law enforcement representatives gathered in the main chamber. The video was played for them all. No one in the room remained unaffected. Some turned away. Others cried. No one denied the horror of what they saw. When the footage ended, silence stretched across the room. Thomas Watson, Amber's father, sat in the gallery. He had been invited at the last minute, warned that the content would be disturbing. When he saw his daughter on the screen, tied and trembling, he bit down on his hand until he bled just to keep from screaming. He watched as her final moments unfolded before his eyes, recorded by men who laughed as they committed the atrocity. When the lights came back on, Thomas stood up, eyes wet but clear. "It wasn't Harper," he said. "I was wrong. I blamed an innocent man." Carter nodded, his own face pale and drawn. "And now we make it right." Arrest warrants were issued for Jackson Miller and Trey Stevens. A specialized task force was dispatched to locate them. At the same time, news outlets began to catch wind of the brewing scandal. A story involving a wrongful conviction, a heroic dog, and a violent biker gang spread fast. Public pressure mounted. The Department of Justice initiated an internal review. That night, in his cell, John received a visit from the warden. "You're being transferred," he said, "protective custody until we finalize everything." "Am I free?" John asked. "Not yet, but they're working on it." The transfer van took him to a temporary facility in a quieter part of the city. He was given a private room, access to news updates, and, more importantly, he was allowed to see Max again. When the dog entered the room, John dropped to his knees and hugged him tightly. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Max leaned against him, tail swishing gently against the floor. For a moment, there was no prison, no courtroom, no death sentence. There was only a man and his dog, bound together by loyalty stronger than any law. John Harper sat in the temporary holding room provided by the state, still under surveillance but no longer behind iron bars. The light in the room was warmer, the walls no longer gray and oppressive. Yet even here, surrounded by more comfort than he'd seen in months, he couldn't feel peace. Not fully. The video had shaken everyone, but for John it was confirmation of the horror he'd feared since Amber's death, that she hadn't simply vanished, and that her final moments were even worse than imagined. Detective Michael Bennett returned that afternoon with more news. The forensic evidence retrieved from the forest, including the gloves, condom, and bottle, had been confirmed to carry DNA from multiple men, none of them John. Further analysis identified partial matches from databases linked to two known suspects, Jackson Miller and Trey Stevens. Both had long criminal histories, including violent assaults and gang affiliations, yet had evaded serious prison time through a combination of threats, technicalities, and fear within the community. Their connection to Amber was initially believed to be non-existent, but new testimony surfaced from a girl named Rachel, a former friend of Amber's who hadn't come forward during the initial investigation. She told investigators that Amber had received threatening messages weeks before her death, messages she had kept hidden from John. According to Rachel, Amber once confided that she had witnessed something at a biker hangout near the edge of Black Hollow, something involving Miller and Stevens that made her afraid for her life. John sat still as Bennett relayed all of this. His face didn't change, but his fist tightened in his lap. "She didn't tell me," he said finally. "She was trying to protect me, and I failed to protect her." Bennett placed a hand on the table between them. "No one blames you now, John. You didn't do this." "But I didn't stop it either." Meanwhile, Judge Carter convened an emergency judicial review. The video was now part of official evidence, and the case against John Harper had collapsed in the face of undeniable proof. The Department of Corrections prepared formal documents for his release, while media outlets scrambled to obtain interviews and footage. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, some demanding justice for Amber, others outraged at how close the state came to executing an innocent man. Carter himself addressed the crowd, stepping up to a podium with deep lines of fatigue carved into his face. "We made a mistake," he said. "The system failed John Harper. But we have the truth now, and we will act accordingly." The arrest of Miller and Stevens took place 3 days later. They had holed up in a rundown garage on the outskirts of Rockford, Illinois, believing they were still safe. SWAT officers surrounded the area at dawn, using tear gas to draw them out. Both were taken into custody without resistance, their faces blank, unrepentant. Inside the garage, law enforcement found disturbing trophies: photos, items of clothing, and a small safe containing weapons and cash. The final link came when Miller's phone was recovered. On it, they found deleted messages that mirrored the threats Amber had received. Prosecutors quickly assembled a grand jury. With the weight of evidence now insurmountable, Formal charges were brought against both men for multiple counts of rape, torture, and first-degree murder. John Harper's release came quietly on a rainy morning, without reporters or cameras. He stepped through the gates of the holding facility with Max beside him, wearing the same clothes he'd worn months ago when arrested. The sky above was gray, the streets slick with water. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He only bent down to Max and whispered, "Let's go home." But he didn't go home. He returned to the courthouse, not for vengeance, but to see Thomas Watson, Amber's father. They met in one of the back rooms, away from the press and the noise. Thomas stood silently, eyes red and tired. John waited for anger or apology, but instead the man simply nodded and said, "I was wrong." "We all were," John replied, "but they'll pay now." "And what about you?" Thomas asked. "What happens to you?" John looked down at Max, then out the window at the rain. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm not staying here." He left the city 2 days later. No interviews, no statements, just silence. Justice had been served, but the cost remained. The courtroom was filled to capacity. The air was thick with tension, the kind that settled over every bench and echoed off the marble walls. Reporters occupied the back rows, their pens ready, cameras lined along the side aisle. John Harper sat in the front beside his lawyer, wearing a clean suit provided by the state, his posture straight, his face calm but unreadable. Max lay quietly at his feet, leashed but alert, his eyes following every movement in the room. Jackson Miller and Trey Stevens were brought in separately, each flanked by armed officers. They wore orange jumpsuits and shackles, their expressions indifferent, even amused. Trey smirked at the crowd while Miller barely blinked. Neither man looked at John. Judge William Carter presided again, his demeanor markedly different from the one he had displayed during John's sentencing. There was no arrogance now, no assumption of certainty, only gravity. The trial was short, the evidence overwhelming. The video, the DNA, the testimony from Rachel and others who had come forward, there was no room for doubt. The prosecution presented everything meticulously, every frame of footage, every recovered message, every forensic detail that tied Miller and Stevens to the scene of the crime. The defense did not argue innocence. Instead, they requested life sentences to avoid the death penalty, but it was a hollow request. The brutality of the crimes spoke louder than any plea for mercy. When Miller took the stand, he was defiant. "Yeah, I did it," he said, shrugging as if he were admitting to stealing a car. "She screamed. They all did. That's what made it fun." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. One woman fainted. John sat perfectly still, his jaw clenched. Max raised his head. Trey offered no apology either. "She shouldn't have followed us. Should have minded her business." The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Judge Carter's voice was firm as he read the sentencing. Jackson Miller and Trey Stevens, for the crimes of rape, torture, and first-degree murder, this court sentences you both to death by lethal injection. There was no applause, no cheering, only silence, as if the very walls held their breath. Miller sneered. Trey stared blankly ahead. Neither man spoke, but for the families in the room, for those who had waited months for justice, the sentence was enough. As the guards led the two killers away, John lowered his head and exhaled slowly. Relief didn't come. Not yet. After the proceedings ended, John stepped outside into the pale afternoon light. Reporters swarmed, asking him how he felt, what he planned to do, whether he forgave anyone. He said nothing. He only walked to the steps of the courthouse, where Max followed closely beside him, and looked out over the crowd. Somewhere in the sea of faces, he saw Thomas Watson watching him. The two men exchanged a look that carried too much weight for words. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just understanding. That night, John didn't celebrate. He sat on the floor of his small rented room, Max curled beside him. The dog had barely left his side since the release. John stroked the thick black fur in silence, his thoughts still tangled in the forest, in the courtroom, in Amber's last moments. He had been cleared. He had been spared. But he had not been healed. Justice had been delivered to the men who destroyed Amber's life. But hers was still lost. No sentence, no headline, no vindication could bring her back. He whispered her name once before he slept. And Max, sensing the grief in his master's voice, placed his head on John's chest. They stayed like that for hours, two survivors of something no words could define. The quiet town of Red Hollow lay nestled in the Montana countryside, far from the chaos of Chicago and everything John Harper had left behind. It was a place with no headlines, no cameras, no courtrooms, just snow-dusted hills, pine trees that whispered in the wind, and a silence that stretched for miles. John had chosen this place not for comfort, but for anonymity. He didn't want recognition. He didn't want to be remembered as the man wrongly accused or the one who escaped death by a miracle. He wanted peace, even if he wasn't sure he deserved it. The cabin he rented was small, old, and half buried in frost, but it was enough. Max roamed freely through the open land, always returning to John's side by dusk, his instincts as strong as ever. Every evening they sat by the window, watching the sun set behind the trees. Some nights John spoke to Max. Other nights he said nothing at all. Inside the town, the locals knew little about him. He was just a quiet man with a loyal dog who paid in cash and kept to himself. He helped the elderly man next door carry firewood, occasionally repaired fences, and always tipped generously when he bought groceries. No one asked questions, and John offered no answers. He didn't look like a man searching for redemption. He looked like someone who had already made peace with never finding it. But something began to shift in him with each passing week. The nightmares grew less frequent. The guilt didn't disappear, but it softened. The memories of Amber, once too painful to face, began to come back not as violent flashes, but as small moments. Her laughter, her voice, the way she called Max over to her side. Those memories still hurt, but they no longer crushed him. One day, a young boy from the town approached John while he was fixing his porch railing. The boy was crying. His dog had gone missing, and he had heard John was someone who could help. John didn't say much. He just whistled for Max and followed the boy through the woods. They found the pup stuck in a ravine, shivering and scared. Max climbed down first, nudging the frightened animal gently until John could pull him free. When they returned to the boy's house, the mother tried to pay John. He refused. The boy hugged Max before running inside, and for the first time in what felt like years, John smiled, not out of joy, but because something inside him had cracked open. A feeling he thought was gone had returned. Purpose. As spring approached, the snow melted from the rooftops and the trees budded green again. John spent his mornings walking with Max through the forest trails. He found new strength in routine, in solitude, in the simple act of surviving. He read old books, repaired broken furniture, wrote notes he never sent. And always, Max was there. The dog, who had once raced through a blizzard to save him, now slept peacefully by his bed each night, his breathing a soft reminder that loyalty could outlast even death. One evening, as the sky blushed with twilight, John sat outside with Max by his side. The wind was cool but not cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. He placed a hand on Max's head and whispered, "You brought me back. You didn't give up when everyone else did." Max looked up, his eyes calm and watchful. John didn't need a response. He already had it. In that moment, something shifted. Not a dramatic revelation or a sudden healing, but a quiet release. The weight he carried for Amber, for the months stolen from him, for the judgment of a world too quick to condemn. It didn't vanish, but it lifted just enough for him to breathe. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that courtroom, nor the one who had walked out. He was something else now. Someone who had been broken and had chosen to keep walking anyway. As the stars blinked into view above the quiet Montana sky, John leaned back and closed his eyes. Behind him was a nightmare. Beside him was a friend. And ahead of him, whatever it would be, was finally his to face. Sometimes justice comes not from the system, but from loyalty. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Do you believe that true devotion can change fate? Hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one.